Thank you to everyone for turning up today. It's the third meeting of the Access Europe chapter. And today, as you can see, we are joined by Crystal Long, who's a long-standing Access MVP. And she's going to be talking about the two different sorts of chart available in Access, the classic, interesting word for them, the old style charts that many of us still use, and the modern charts that were introduced a few years ago. And I'm going to stop sharing now and pass back over to Crystal if she'd like to share her screen. And welcome, Crystal.
Welcome and bienvenue, welcome. We're going to have some fun charting. Life is a cabaret, my friend. Charts give you more to say. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here with Colin and Alessandro for an exciting meeting with Access Europe, visualizing your data with Access. A picture is worth 1,000 words, especially when it comes to showing numbers. Access has two types of charts, modern and classic. We'll cover them both. And I'll also show you how to add bar charts to your Access queries. So, all right, lovely, lovely. So a chart has lots of objects. And when I've labeled these, and I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but these will be in the PowerPoint deck that you can download. And it is the only PowerPoint presentation in the zip file that you can download. And also this PowerPoint presentation will be posted on Access User Groups later on. So first, we're going to talk briefly about modern charts, really kind of because there's not a lot to them. You can create about 10 different types of charts. And the way that you get to them is from the form design or report design ribbon. You can insert a modern chart. And once that object is inserted, you have two ways you can set things on the chart: the property sheet and chart settings. On chart settings, there's a data tab that you can set where data comes from and how you want things to show. Now, kind of one important thing to note here is the legend really has to do with how it will transform the row source or data source as opposed to actually showing the legend. And I've tried to give you screenshots of dialog boxes so that you can look through this at a later point in time and kind of see where things are. And before we go into classic charts, I guess what I will do is I will show you the Access database that I made to demonstrate things, and I'm in the process of making a new chart. So I'll just close all these things and I will show you some of the charts in this database, this sample database that you can download. It has a couple files. The main data set for this is products, which are musical products by a music store. And I chose sectors instead of categories, but only because sectors is a shorter word. But for all intents and purposes, these are categories like whether it's wind or whether it's brass and just sales. This is just a very simplistic example of the charts that I'm going to show you. So here's a classic chart. It's just a bar chart, which means the columns are horizontal instead of vertical. A bar chart is good to show because, we often look at things landscape. So if you have not very many bars and you really want to kind of see the differences between the bars better, a bar chart might be better as opposed to a column chart. So here's a column chart. And as you can see, we have a couple different series. This is from total sales from 2020 and 2021. This is totally made up data. Although I tried to make it realistic, I actually did some research to find out how brass and keyboard and percussion and string and wind, how they sell. Although I think I was a little bit influenced in the first year of data I made up. I made keyboard kind of high, and that's because I play piano. So I just really like keyboards. Of course, I really love them all too. Music is. So this is called a clustered column because in a particular series for a year, what you see, they're clustered as opposed to stacked. And this would be a stacked chart. So this would be where you see the category, or what I'm calling sector. You see the total sales, but you see them differentiated. So it kind of depends on how you want your data to appear. Now, I've put a lot of example charts in this sample database that you can download, and _C means it was made with a classic chart control, and _M at the end means it was made with a modern chart control. So first we'll talk about modern charts, and the very first thing you see is just a download link so that you can get all of these files. There are 10 types of modern charts, and I'll just hide this navigation pane, make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. There are basically 10 types of modern charts you can create. And here's an example of what each one looks like. So depending on how you want to show your data, hopefully this can give you some good ideas. And then on how to set the chart, and we haven't actually created one yet, so I'm just going to kind of go through this a little quickly. But once you create it, you can choose, once you create the object to show the chart, you can set your data source. And that can be from tables that you have, queries that you have. I like to do queries, or you can show both. And then the access category, and I'll just kind of quickly go back here to my PowerPoint slide to show you objects. The category access is along the bottom. That's also called the x-axis. The primary value access is along the left-hand side, unless you choose to show it on the right-hand side, but traditionally it's shown on the left-hand side. It's also called the primary value access because we can have a secondary value access, which you see on the left side. Now, this is really useful if your data has different ranges of information. So for instance, you see on this particular chart, we have things ranging from like 1.2 million to the highest is 2.5 million. But the total, where we're adding everything up, goes, much higher because these are, bigger values. So it's useful then to show like the total on a secondary axis with different markers for how much each is. So the legend, really in the modern charts, know that legend is for grouping. So on the modern charts, we have chart settings. Now, what I'm showing you here is the data tab on chart settings and the property sheet for all of the values that are actually applicable to a modern chart. We have data, where the data comes from, and we'll have event, like in this case, I don't have any events happening, but these are the events that could be triggered. And then we also see the format tab. Here's where you're going to see most of the things that you can set on the chart, and you can set all of these programmatically via VBA. And then I've just enumerated the types of charts that you can create with a modern chart. On the format, which was not showing on that previous slide, basically at the top of the format tab, there's a drop down, and you pick the data series that you want to format. And you can change the display name so it doesn't have to be whatever you called it in your query or your table. And you can also choose to plot that series on the primary or the secondary access. Now, if you don't make a choice, it's all going to go on the primary. But if your values are like way out of range from what you're primarily plotting, you would probably want that series to go on a secondary access. You can set your fill color, your border color. You can display data labels. And what are data labels? Data labels are things that enumerate the values. For instance, on this first orange bar, 1.2 is a data label. 2.3 in the yellow bar, or column, I should say, is a data label. So those put actually on the chart so they don't have to kind of look to see, well, what was the value? They can actually see what that value is.
Crystal, can I just interrupt for 1 second? Request
Certainly.
from one member of the audience, if you could move your mouse about to show what you're actually referring to at any time, that would be appreciated.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you could see my mouse.
Yep, you can see the
Okay.
cursor anyway, yeah.
Okay, so you can set fill color on a series. You can set the border color. You can choose to display the data label. That's just a checkbox. And then if you wanted to make a trend line, you have various options here where you can decide how that trend line will be calculated. And then you could also give that trend line a name that will show up in your legend. Now, modern charts, unlike classic charts, if you, oh, and I see I have a typo. If you make a trend line, you can't actually take it out of the legend. You know, you can do so for classic charts. Then I've given you a help link so that you can learn more about charts and enumerated the events. And that's kind of it for modern charts, except for I have also given you a list of the properties, and I've given you links, only links for the properties that actually deal with charts, as opposed to like backstyle, which all controls have, and other things that all controls have. I've given you links to specific help for that feature of a chart. And then I haven't given you links for the things that are kind of standard for all controls. But you can scroll down through this. And then I've also given you links for helps on the various objects that you can influence. And like for a chart series, you can, as we saw in the settings, you can pick the border color, you can pick the fill color, you can pick the display name, you can choose whether or not to display labels, and you have a few other choices. A chart series collection is basically the collection of all the series that are showing on your chart. So here again, going back to this example, we actually have two groups, but we have 5 series. So in the orange bar, you see series, and then you see series again for 2021. There are only 2 markers, 2 data points for this series. And then the yellow markers are a different series, and the blue markers are a different series. So just to kind of get you familiar with the terminology for the charting. And then when you make a modern chart, it automatically assumes you want to aggregate what you are charting. And this might not always be the case, but here are the different aggregation options that you have. And then you can choose the name for the chart values. And here again, that's what's going to show up in the legend. And then you have an object for the collection. And that's kind of it for modern charts. And the reason I say that's kind of it for modern charts is because there just isn't very much to them. Let's actually create one.
Okay, I was going to say, Crystal, I got invited to unmute, so hopefully that means it's okay for me to interrupt you here.
Certainly.
There is one place in the setup that I found very not intuitive at first. So, and that's I believe where you're going through the separate accesses and having to choose it on the UI. So maybe if you hopefully you know what I'm talking about. If you could make sure to show that during your example here. I didn't realize you were going to actually build one right now.
We actually might need to put another column in our modern chart for the total as well. Is that what you're getting at, Maria?
Yeah, the problem I found with it was actually in the setup area and how you have to switch from one to the other. And it's just not intuitive. So I think if you do that, it should demo how you would then go back and modify and make corrections to it.
I'd like to go back to a point Maria made about changing one of the series to a secondary access. Often this would be to add a line for the total. To answer, I'll show you two things: how to change one of the series and also how to get a total in the data source to begin with. Here I have two queries. One shows sales by sector by month for 1 year, and the other shows totals by month for 1 year. All of the sales are reported at the end of the month, EOM. I want all of this in one query so it can be charted. There are two ways to do it: a union query or a crosstab query. Create a form or use one that you already have, and then insert Modern Chart from the Form Design ribbon. Pick Column and then Clustered Column. You can either drop the control or drag the size. The next thing is to select the data source. This chart doesn't look very useful. Let's change a few settings. I'll pick EOM, end of the month, for the category axis, sector for the grouping field in the legend, and the amount for the value axis. The total is a lot taller than the rest of the columns. On the format for chart settings, we can change the total to be on a secondary axis. But there isn't a place to change the chart type for this series. Show the property sheet and change the chart type to be combo. Access assumes that the last series, wind, would be the line. It's not. Choose the data series you want to change to total, set it to be a line. Now we want to set wind back to a clustered column. That looks better. Now let's set some of the chart properties. Has subtitle is yes. Now we see a placeholder for subtitle under the chart title. Specify the chart title, and unfortunately the zoom box doesn't work here. Sector sales by month 2021. The subtitle, which is already set to display, will be combo, clustered column, and line. I'd really like to change the format of the category axis to just show the month abbreviation. Let's see if there's a property to do that. I don't see anything. There's a way to set format for the primary and secondary axes, but not the category axis. Before I go any further, I'll save this form. I don't like the way that the category access labels are staggered. I could make the font smaller, but I don't want to. Let's see if I can get them to change by themselves. Make the chart a little bigger. Some of the width is all those extra zeros on the value axes labels. I can set the format here. I'm going to close the form and divide the calculations for the data source by 1,000. Now in just a few minutes we'll see I didn't have to do that. But let's say that I don't know there's a way. Here's the union query. I could do it here, but I'd have to change the field name, and that means modifying the chart. Instead, I'll do it in each of the source queries for the union. Ordinarily, I'd change the calculated field name to reflect thousands, but again, I'm going to keep the same field name just to make this quicker, not because it's the best way. Now, let's take a look at the union query. That's what I want. There are lots of decimal places, but they won't have to show. Now to look at the form with the chart. And it looks better. Category access labels are still scrunched. Let's make this control a little wider. I'll also change the color for the total series. There is no fill color since markers don't show. The line is the border color. Modern charts update right away unless you've told them not to. Change the dash type to dash and something really different for the border color that hasn't been used by one of the other series. Now to change the chart title to reflect that values are in thousands of dollars. Save and look at the form view. If the primary value access and secondary value access format our currency, we also get 2 decimal places. And the only way to get rid of them is with a custom format. Someone asked about setting the scale. How would we do that? Let's set the primary access maximum to be 500. Nothing changes until the access range is set to fixed. The default is auto. There we go. Now to set the secondary access to be fixed with a maximum of 1,500. What I don't have control over is how it increments. It's doing every 2. And I'd like to change the major and minor units, but I don't see a property setting. What I do see is that I didn't have to divide the source data to get thousands. Instead, the display units could have been set. Too late for that now. I'll change the maximum of the secondary access to be 1250. Save it. Look at the form view. Oh, one last thing to remove is the record selectors and navigation buttons. Beautiful. Chart done. Modern chart combination. Now the classic charts are quite a bit more powerful. Now I really haven't started to talk about them yet because Microsoft is really pushing these like 10 modern charts where we have 73 classic charts. But the modern charts are apparently easier for other people to manipulate and modify. On a classic chart, which is what this is, the data comes from a row source. Now, unlike the modern charts, you give it a row source, and then the modern charts give you a transformed row source. So that was one of the things that I pointed out in this documentation that I gave you, is you have the row source. Now, I didn't sort these alphabetically because I wanted them next to each other logically. So in the modern chart, you have a row source, and you can change the row source, but the transformed row source is something you cannot change. The only way to change this is by modifying the settings and modifying the property. I'm going to show you really quickly. I know I'm digressing from what I'm showing you now, but in the zip file that you have, so this is called graph example. This is a good example for you to see how to manipulate the classic charts with VBA. And this does things that the modern charts can't do. So if you wanted to, for instance, graph, let's say, I'll go year to date. So I'll do minus 6 months from now. Okay, so not quite year to date, to now. And I just want to see the chart of all that. And let's just do it by the second topic. This shows me a line chart. Now I can also modify everything about this chart, like for instance down here, or over here. If I wanted to modify the format of this x-axis or the category axis, I can. If I want to say, oh, those are awfully big numbers, let's say I don't want the value to be just the number itself, I'm going to divide by 1,000. I'll just put a comma after it. And now I make my chart again, and those numbers are divided by 1,000. Now, I'm not going to talk about this a whole lot. Actually, I have a video on this, so you can look at that. But I did want to point it out. The classic charts are very easy to manipulate programmatically. Now let's look at how you would make a combination chart with a classic chart. The classic chart tool is in the drop-down of the controls, and I will click on the chart. And here again, I could just drop it or drag the size, and I'll drag it. Now I can choose a table or a query, and I'm going to actually go get the cross tab this time. Next dialog box, which fields do I want to include? And I will just move them all over. Well, apparently I can't move them all over. Well, not in the wizard anyway, but I will show you how you can do it. We'll go to the next dialog box here. And what do we want for the chart? Here again, I'm just going to pick a clustered column to begin with, and then later on we can change that as well. In this case, I'm simply going to skip this because I'm going to change everything with the row source later. And what do I want to call this chart? Now, this is not the name in the navigation pane. This is going to be the title of the chart. And I'll just give it the same title that I gave the modern chart, and finish. Now right away, I know I want to change the row source, so I'm just going to go to the Data tab because what I want is exactly right here. So I'm just going to rename this, come over here, just forget about anything I put there, and select my own source. And just take a look at it, see what I have. And this is what I want. Now what's showing is not what it's going to look like. The classic charts don't actually render till you go to the form view. So here's the form view, and it's already, okay, granted, it is pretty ugly, but it's already pretty close to what I want, except for total needs to go on the secondary axis. I need to stretch those things out a bit. I'll put the legend at the bottom. So, go back to the design. Going to double click this object here. First I'm going to right click on the legend and go to format, and the placement will be at the bottom. That way I'm going to give myself more width. Now it's also kind of big, but I can also control everything about it. Whatever you want to change, just right click, go to Format, and on the font, well, it is set to 8 points, but it says auto scale, so it's probably auto scaling it. I'll just make it 10 point, won't make it bold, I'll make it regular, and OK. This is probably also auto scaling. Let me right click here, go to Format the chart title, take off the auto scale, and I'm actually going to put this at 14 points, and OK. Now I see right away my chart just keeps getting smaller and smaller, but I can click to select this little area. Notice up here it says I have the plot area. I can make it taller. So I have a lot more control over the size. Now these charts do look better when they're bigger. So now I'll just click outside the chart area and I will collapse the ribbon, collapse the navigation pane, make this chart bigger, and give myself a little more space to work with. Now I'll double click on the chart and I will here again make the plot area. Now I got the grid lines, which I'm really going to take away the grid lines, so I'm going to press the delete key to take those away. Click here on the plot area, make it taller. Right click on the axis, go to the category axis, go to Format Axis, and take away the auto scaling, make it 10 points, regular, and OK. And here again, I'm ending up with the month and the year. Although unlike the modern chart, I can right click, go to Format Axis, and I can actually give the exact format that I want. And in this case, I already have the year in the title. So I'll just take the year out of the format code here, and now I just have the months. I want these tall ones to be on the secondary axis, so I'll go to Format the Data Series, and on Axis I'll go secondary with this one, and OK. Now I also want this to be a line, so I can right click on the series, change the chart type to a line, and I'll pick this first one without markers. And I'm starting to get closer to what I want. This lettering is too big, so right click on Format the Axis, go to the font. I'm not going to let it auto scale. I'll set this to 10 point, just regular, and on the number I'm going to set it to, actually I'll set it to currency. And here I do have a choice of decimal places without having to go to a custom format. And so I'll say OK here, right click, go to Format the Axis, set that to currency, 0 decimal places, and the font I will make 10, and OK. How to change the color? Well, you don't have as much control over the solid colors, and actually I think I don't like that solid color that it picks, so here again, Format the Data Series, and I can drop down. Now this is the border color. Right now it's set on automatic. I'll just say none for that border, and for the inside, let me go with this orangey color. And I can also adjust how, I picked a color that's real close to the next one. Let me go to Format Data Series and pick something different for that one. So not that pink, let me go more with that's close to another color. And here is where I start to kind of run out of colors, seemingly. However, we can go to Fill Effects and we can do graded colors. I'm not going to do that here now, but I will just tell you that you can. And OK, so those colors are kind of different from each other. Now, I don't want borders around Well, maybe I do around the yellow, but I don't want the border around that one. So I'll go none there and OK. And wind also has a border. Let me take the border off of wind, set that to none. I also made this more of a purpley color in the classic chart. So for the color here, I'll go more with this purpley color for the line color. And the style, I'm going to pick dashes and OK. Instead of an actual subtitle here, oh, and this was also thousands of dollars. We actually did that in the query. But instead of a subtitle here, I'm just going to put a second line, and I'll go combination. And this is going to be a clustered column with line. Now I don't want these to be bold, so I can just highlight that, and I can actually do this differently. And you know, maybe I want actual combination. I'm going to make that even a little smaller, so I'll go 10 with that. I can move this title around just by dragging it. So I could just click on this. I could drag it wherever I want it to go. Here, undo. I'm just going to undo. Undoes actually what you just did. Now I want to take the line off of the legend. So I'll go to Format Legend, and on Patterns, I'll set the line to none. And OK. Now, I guess my writing is a little small on my secondary axis, so I'll go to Format the Axis and Font. Somehow it got set to 2.5 because it's auto scaling. Let me choose 10. I love being able to just control this, and in fact, see how easy it is. If I wanted these to be slanted, I could just go to Alignment here, and I could make these vertical or at an angle. Whatever I want. I'll just undo that so it's more like the modern chart. Now, one thing I really like about the classic chart are all the colors. I mean, we don't have very many solid colors to pick from, but we do have a lot of fill effects. So let me go here to the fill effects, and I'm going to say I want 2 colors. Color 2, I'm just going to pick maybe this light orange one, and I'll just pick this style of it and see how that looks. I could do a lot more formatting with this, but I think that's enough to give you an idea. And I'll just click outside here, and that takes me back to the form. I call it this same name, so I'll just F2, and for rename, Control C, Escape, and on this I'll do a save as, and I'll paste that, but I'll put an _M on the end for modern. There's something else I'm going to do. Instead of that sunken look, I'm going to have the control be just a flat look, and just like what I did with the modern chart, I'm going to take the record selectors, set them to no, and navigation buttons to no. Save it, have a look, and we're done. A classic chart combination with lemon line. I mean, one of the reasons why they made these modern charts was so we didn't have to go through so many gymnastics with the classic charts, because in the classic charts, if you can make the query of what you want to graph, beautiful. But a lot of people have trouble doing that. So what's the way around it? And while I'm here, I might as well point out another shortcoming of the modern charts that the classic charts have is, let's look at a pie chart. Here we have a pie chart, and we have data labels showing us the total value. Kind of useless for a pie chart, don't you think? Because a pie chart generally would show us percentages. but there is no way that we can get the data labels to be a percentage. Now, one of the things that I gave you in this PowerPoint presentation is just some dialog boxes that show you what you can set when you set up a classic chart. On the classic charts, when you look at a data series, you can choose to plot it on the primary axis or the secondary axis, just like the modern chart. On the modern chart, when you drop down on those settings and you pick a series, you can say primary or secondary axis. So that kind of goes in sync. But what you can't do then is specify, like down here, I guess I can't really highlight things, but can you see my cursor on the data labels? On a classic chart, you can show data labels, you can show the series name. It's kind of in the bottom center part of the screen. You can show the series name, the category name, the value, and you can also show percentages. Here, we cannot show percentages. We can only show the actual value itself. If we wanted to show a percentage for this chart, then we would have to, in this sales by sector query that we're basing it on, we would actually have to create another column in this query that showed the percent, which means we'd either have to pull in another query with the totals, or we'd have to do a dsum to get the percentage. Then we can show it on a modern chart. I kind of want to wrap up. I know I've been a little bit scattered because I had a lot to cover here about what you can do with classic and modern charts. And I haven't even showed you the PowerPoint presentation on my modern charts. So or my classic charts. So let me go to that. On the classic charts, if you right click on the classic charts is your friend. So going back here to my, I think it's slide number 2. There it is. My objects. If you are looking at the objects and you know what you want to affect, then you can literally just right click on that object when you're doing the design, and you can go straight to setting things for that particular thing that you're looking at. So if like you right click on the chart area, you can set the titles, whether or not the chart title will show. Now, classic charts don't have the subtitle, and that's because you can actually format things differently within the title area. And you can also put another text box on there. You can put things all over the place with classic charts. I didn't specify a category axis title because it's 2020 and 2021. I thought it would be kind of apparent those were years. I didn't specify value because in the title, I've already said it's millions of dollars. And the second category axis, which I don't have, we could have another horizontal axis on top, which I do not have, but I do have a second value axis, which the modern charts call the secondary value axis. I have a label there for total. You can then pick a chart type. So if you select a series, you can just change the chart type for that series. And you can set your axes. You can set now overall on the chart area, you can set the legend to show at the bottom, the top, the right, the left, the corner. The modern charts can also put the legend in different places. What the classic charts have that the modern charts do not have are custom types up there in the upper left. So if you make a chart and you just really like the way that looks, notice that Below all the choices for the different chart types, I have user defined and built in for my select from, and I can choose user defined. And if I do that, I can actually name this chart, and then I can call it up again and use it in other places. Now, coming down here to the lower left for data labels, like I've already said, we have lots of options that we don't have with modern charts. Modern charts just seem to have one way to put the label on. You don't really have a control over how much information shows in that label. And what I'm not showing you here is the data labels options for pie chart. A pie chart is like one series. So like all the orange markers or all the yellow markers. You do not have control over the individual colors of each data point like you do in a classic chart. You also don't have the ability to do percentages. And then finally, grid lines, we can choose how many grid lines we want to show also on the classic chart. And we have a lot more color choices. Although the colors out of the gate, when you first make a classic chart, oh my goodness, is it really ugly? I mean, it really truly is ugly. I don't know why they didn't make the wizard just make a better looking chart to start with. Maybe people wouldn't have complained so much about the classic charts if they had done that. But you have so many more color choices. You only have the palette that's showing to you here on the left. But if you go to fill effects, then you can specify gradients, you can specify textures, you can specify patterns, you can put your own picture in there. I mean, you have so much ability to control the way that it looks. On a data series, let's say on a column chart, you want the gap to be bigger. So one of the reasons why I put all of these dialog box screenshots in this PowerPoint presentation for you is so you can find what you're looking for. And it's like, wow, I know I can set the gap somewhere, but where do I do that? Well, it's when you right click on a data series. So if you look in, so in the kind of the lower center on the options for a data series, you do have the options to set the gap width and also the overlap. So not only can you make them further apart, but you can also make the actual, you can change the overlap so they overlap each other or not. You can have negative or positive numbers here. Same with the gap width. I mean, you can really do a lot. I know I've kind of gone through this really fast, but hopefully you'll if you're interested in charting such as I am, you'll download the samples and you'll take a look at them. And then just finally, I want to tell you that you can actually put bar charts in a query. So this is in the PowerPoint presentation. You can just make a calculated field. Here are some decimal values for Unicode characters that you can use with CHRW. And I've given you a couple options here of like 9600 is just, I like to use the upper half block in a query just so it doesn't fill the whole row. So there's kind of a separator between that and what's next, but you also need to kind of maybe divide it. You need to know a little bit about your values if you're going to put a bar chart in a query. And then I also like to set the format property to maybe be blue for the chart. And you can do that. If you go to the format properties for that column, then you can just use bracket blue bracket for positive number. And I share code, tools, articles, and videos on msaccessgurus.com. I also have stuff on accessmvp.com. I post on various forums, although I don't post as prolifically now as I used to. I have a YouTube channel, and I'm always really, really happy to connect one-on-one with people that just want to learn how to do it themselves. And just a special deal I have this month is I'll reduce my rate for you and I'll help you whenever you need it. And I don't want to go any more past because I want to leave some time for questions.
Thank you, Crystal. That was incredibly detailed and very clear and extremely thorough. I've got one question, and there was at least one that I saw in the chat that I want to raise as well, and that is that one of the things I don't think ever used is events in charts, and I don't know whether you have used them, and if so, what do you use them for?
Well, if you look at the various events,
Lost focus, got focus, mouse, and so on.
I generally don't use events in charts. I do now. I will tell you about what I haven't done yet, but also another big pro with the classic charts is when you click undo, it just undoes what you just did. Whereas if you click undo and you're making a modern chart, now I didn't demonstrate this, but you better save your form or your report before you click undo, because you might be surprised at how much actually gets undone. Maybe, well, probably way more than you want. The benefit for Access is that the modern charts can be in a continuous form, whereas with the classic charts, you can just have one of them. So like put it in the footer of the form and have it show for a classic chart. The control has to be in the header or the footer. It can't be in the detail, but in a report, it can be in either.
One thing I don't think you mentioned is, of course, modern charts are not visible to anyone who's got a Access 2000, and I'm not even sure if they're in 2016. I don't think they are. But earlier versions of Access can't see them. You just get an empty. They don't fail. They don't get an error. You just get an empty space.
I found a really big problem is when a classic chart has a transformed row source, and especially if I've changed the data to have different column headings. And this was probably another reason why they did the modern charts, was just because crosstabs really screwed up terribly with the classic charts. They just were not very forgiving. Now, if you label the headings, especially if you label them in the SQL of the query, they're a lot better. But, who knows what you might want to do in the future. I just find they're not very forgiving when you change them. So really the way to make them work again, sadly, is just to create the object again.
Thank you. I'm just going through the chat now. I've just asked people if they want to come in and ask a question that isn't in the chat, if they could turn their microphones on. Some time ago, Tom Wickerath suggested an obvious thing, and that is there an example where you can show two different charts side by side?
Classic versus modern.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Side by side. I thought you pointed out earlier the underbar C is classic and the underbar M is modern. So for example, F chart column clustered C and versus F chart column clustered M side by side.
And here they are next to each other. I just chose for my examples to put one chart on each. Oh, sorry, I got a column and a bar. But one thing that you can do in a classic that you cannot do in the modern, just one of the many things, you can't have graded colors. So the classic actually has a graded yellow background, whereas the modern chart just has a clean, solid color background.
Basically, I was asking for visual differences. So it actually looks like this modern is really cut down from, which you've kind of confirmed in your later statements.
Looks like a pale imitation.
Yeah. Now, another big advantage of the modern chart, a great big advantage, is when you're in design view and you're making changes, the classic chart only renders when you look at the form or report view. It doesn't necessarily show everything you've done. The modern chart updates immediately, or does by default. There is a property setting where you can disable that because it does slow it down. But I think that was like just and that might have been a really big push why they started on, hey, we're
I mean, it seems to be a deliberate policy to make the colours more muted. I think Chris said paler version of it. I think it's just more muted colours. But I agree with you. I rarely use modern charts. I was very excited when they were announced about 5 years ago, and very disappointed with the reality. You can do certain things quicker, but you soon outgrow them, is my feeling about it.
And I didn't actually have any data in this database where I could show a good example of a log chart, but there's times where you have like little values, you have really high values, and an exponential chart where you have like 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 is really a wonderful way to be able to show differences, even if the values are small or the values are big. But and scientists use those types of charts a lot, and they're available with classic charts. You can also do high-low close and stock things with classic charts. I have a lot of, I can't say a lot. I have some examples in here. If you go to the example database and you just open up the different forms, I just didn't have time to make more examples, but you can let your imagination run wild here.
Thank you. There was a question from Philip Stiefel earlier about pie charts.
Yes, but actually I would ask a different question first, which is of much more interest to me and probably also the audience. Maybe I didn't pay proper attention. Can you assign colors explicitly to the modern charts? Could I do, like in your total sales bar chart, could I do assign red, yellow, green to the bars, or is that not really possible?
Okay, good question. You can't assign them to the markers. You can assign a color to a series. Now, with a classic chart, you can go down to the marker or the point, however you prefer to say it. With a classic chart, you have total control over the colors. They can be solid colors, they can be gradient colors, they can be textures, they can be patterns, they can be all kinds of things. You have a lot of control over color with a classic chart. With the modern chart, you can only say this series is going to be blue, this series is going to be red, this series is going to be green. You cannot say this point is going to be something different. You can also not add text boxes on a modern chart like you can on a classic chart. I didn't show that, but if you just click somewhere and start typing, here your text comes.
Okay, if you say you can only assign colors to a series, if I had a pie chart which basically displays
no,
like
you can't change it. You can't change it at all because you cannot change individual markers. You have to accept what it already has. You have a color. You could make the whole series a particular color, but that's it.
Okay, thank you. That was the annoying thing I was up to clarify. Thank you.
Another question from me, Crystal. Maybe it's a statement rather than a question. In the classic charts, you can put data labels inside the bar, outside the bar, change the color of them, etc., etc. You've got various different placements, and you can do them horizontally.
And you can move them. And you can move them.
That's what I was about to say. In the modern charts, I don't believe you can do practically any of that. You can put data values on, but I don't think you can actually change the alignment. For example, in a clustered column, I don't think you could put them vertically. I might be wrong.
No, you're totally right. You have no control over alignment in the modern charts. And that's a really big problem. Like, for instance, if you have a lot of values, like, for instance, on the category or x-axis, and you want to make them vertical, you just have to play around with the size of the modern chart until, man, now they're vertical. Yay, I'll keep it that size.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, I've got a quick one. It's to do with events. Is it possible to, for a user, for example, to say, click on one of the bars, and that would then open up another chart that breaks that down into more detail? That type of idea anyway. Or click on keyboard and it'll open up the history on keyboards?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure we could figure out where the mouse was and do it, but I know that you can have events for the total chart itself, but I don't know that you necessarily have events for the objects within the chart.
Right.
However, I could be wrong. The classic charts were actually quite powerful, but so many people complained about them. And it's probably because they were so ugly when you first make one.
In the classic charts, you could draw out a rectangular area and zoom in on them. It's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done.
Yeah, I was thinking more about actually opening up effectively another view.
Yeah.
A more detailed view on a particular area.
What a good idea.
And the classic charts also have, I didn't have time to really go into the coding for them, but in the sample database, not the one that I'm showing you now, but just the graph example where I had the menu where it could modify how you want the chart to look. You have a lot of control over the way that the chart renders. You can go down a lot. Now, some properties are read-only. Unfortunately, color is one of them. So you can't modify color at runtime, but you can see values of actually individual points.
Thank you, Chris. There's a lot of comments in the chat, inevitably from people who say that they tend to break out into Excel to do a chart and then bring it back into Access. And indeed, a quote from somebody on one of the forums says he'd rather rub sand in his eyes than make a chart in Access. I think
could have been Daniel, huh?
No, it's not. But if he was here, the person who made that comment, unfortunately, he's not. I think he might be persuaded to some extent otherwise. But I think a lot of us, modern charts for beginners are great. They get going on them, whereas classic charts are just too complicated for them. But as I said earlier, I think if you want to do anything more complicated than a simple chart, then you have to go back to the classic charts or go into Excel.
Well, all of the, if you enumerate all of the chart types, you'll see that they all start with Excel. Because Excel, it used to, the Microsoft Graph application is patterned off of what you could do in Excel. Now, Excel has since broken out and brought charts under their umbrella, kind of like what Access did with modern charts. It's not an ActiveX anymore. It's not a shared thing. It's just all inside Access, and Excel did the same thing. And now they have more chart types that aren't available. But 73 chart types, I think, is quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, some of them probably you'll never want to use, but there's certainly a lot that I wish were in the modern charts that aren't. But anyway, Alan Cossey, I know needs to leave shortly, and I want to give him a chance to introduce next month's topic. And Alan is going to be demonstrating something called smog, which is much clearer than it sounds.
Yeah, thanks. Can you see my shared screen? It's a query design. Excellent.
Yes, we can.
Right, very, very quickly. One of the frustrations I have with VBA is that sometimes you have to use strings to describe objects. For example, query names, table names, when I personally would far prefer to treat them as objects and be able to use IntelliSense and compile time checking. So some years ago, I created an add-in for myself, which I call SMOG, stands for Standard Module Object Generation, okay? And I've given, on the screen is an example of an append query. It's rather an extreme one. It's a query which records user details when they log into a customer's database. So you can see that there are 14 queries, 14 parameters. And if you're doing the VBA to run this query, we don't need to go into details today on this, but you can see that there are lots of strings in here, and you're having to dim DB's DAO database and that sort of stuff. But for example, these are all the strings that are used to name the parameters. And if you're like me, if you're copying 34 strings, you'll get something wrong, as I did by accident down the bottom there. So, and you can't use IntelliSense, you can't use compile time checking to see if these are all correct. If you compile this, you get no errors. But with Smog, you can do this. You've got no dimming of DBs, and you can go straight into using the query as an object. Ignore this bit, for example, but you can see that the parameters are named compared to strings. So they're treated as objects, and you can run queries directly like that. So here you've got 0 query and parameter names to get wrong. If you do type one in wrong, despite having IntelliSense, when you do your compile, when you compile it, you get the warning from Access itself. So that's the basics of it. This is a rather extreme example with all these parameters, but normally it also reduces the number of lines of coding that you have to do. Briefly, this is the screen which sets things up. You decide which things you want to treat as objects and press a button, and hey ho, off you go. So that's the main part of my presentation next month. Is that okay, Colin?
Looks interesting.
Right. I'll see you in
June. Thank you, Alan, and thanks for that very brief introduction to whet everybody's appetite for next month. Okay. And I hope you will all think that we got another excellent month to look forward to. Are there any other questions? And we'll say bye-bye to Alan. I know he's got to go, and thank you for coming here. And we had just over 20 participants earlier. We've dropped slightly now to 16, I think, or 16 with Alan gone. But again, a very good turnout. And for those of you who are new here, the video is being recorded. It will be edited and then uploaded to YouTube, hopefully within the next 3 or 4 days. And we've so far had something like 500 views. Well, I haven't looked recently, but last time I looked, Chris Arnold's video from last month had over 500 views. So we get a larger audience in the recording than we do live, but that's the same with all these forums. Does anyone have any other questions for Crystal before we go open it out to more general things?
Hello, Tom. So Crystal, since you like charting, and I just learned about Thomas Moeller, is that how you pronounce his name? The German, his version of charting. Any chance that you or someone else can demonstrate that type of code that's on the GitHub, the link that was presented?
Thomas has done is extremely impressive. Definitely deserves some looking at.
Maybe someone could contact Thomas and ask him if he wants to present.
I'm happy to contact him, or Philip probably knows him better. Philip, I know he does speak some English from Carl's last video. Do you think he actually speaks enough English to be able to lead a presentation in an English forum?
I think so.
When I last spoke to him about that topic, he was not really keen on doing a presentation in English, but that was a couple of years ago, so that might have changed until today.
Okay, do me a favor. Could you email me his contact details again to save me time, and I'll get in touch with him. But we have got topics booked until next January at the moment.
I do want to say that Kent, who's like an Australian guy or maybe New Zealand, he did download Thomas's stuff when it was fairly simplistic. And he modified it, and he actually sent me his database, and I think he might do well at presenting Thomas's stuff.
Okay, thank you. And you've got his contact details as well, have you?
I do.
Kent's the one with the very impressive beard, I believe.
Yes, he is.
Okay, thank you ever so much. Crystal, that was an excellent presentation, and it has encouraged me to go back and look at charts. I think your preference is obviously for the classic charts, as is mine, but I know a lot of people do, especially when they're starting, find difficulty with.
Thank you, Klaus, and you're welcome.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentation.
although, as I said, we've got a lot of topics lined up, and if you go on the website, you'll be able to see what we've got planned for you. We always would be grateful for new topics, and we may change things according to things that come up. For example, all those amazing things that Microsoft are going to introduce in the next few months once they got Dataverse out of the way. But if you weren't at DevCon, but don't be worried when you see the roadmap is going to shrink from 6 items to 1 in the near future. They are going to change the system so they only will publish things when they know that they are just about ready, which doesn't necessarily seem like a forward step, but that's what they've decided to do, because they know that the endless delays have been very frustrating for a lot of people. But after Dataverse is out of the way, the next thing is the modern web browser. Modern, nothing like the idea of charts here, but modern in the sense it's going to be based on Chromium Edge, and that is the very first thing that there's planned. No, it's not. Sorry, they're going to fix the monster bug after 4 years. Any other comments or questions?
Well, they are trying to fix the monster bug. They are not. They didn't say they are going to do it. They are going to have another try with that.
I was trying to show total confidence in Microsoft, Philip, but you're right. Crystal, you said something at the same time as Philip did.
It's forgotten now.
Okay.
Long live Access, was it?
Yes. Viva Access.
Viva la Access.
Yes, absolutely. We love it, even though we have a few problems.
And for those who don't know, Access is 30 years old this year. And if I can just share my screen, I'm going to a web page I updated significantly the other day. And it's a trip through 30 years of Access, from version 1 all the way through version after version to the current Access 365, and also the various changes involved with each one. And as you may or may not know, Northwind, there's been versions of it from version 1 onwards. I think there's been 5 versions, though none since 2007. I find it hard to believe genuinely that they are all the same Nancy DiVolio, but still, never mind. That's her over a period of 10 years. She looks younger in 2002 than she did in 1992. But I've also listed some of the things that Access are supposedly or actually working on. You can see them around this stage here. So Dataverse Connector is due for final release next month. Then hopefully, or actually fixing the monster bug, the inconsistent database error. Then the web browser control, they are inviting feedback on what people want in that. I've said that they need to increase the length of the URL apart from anything else, but there's other things as well. Then enabling large address awareness for 32-bit access. If you can't wait for that, Philip has got code that will allow you to do that now.
Colin, can you put add a link for the inconsistent database error that reminds us what it's about?
Yep, I can do that. And I can also put a link, if Philip is happy, to his version of the code that works now.
Yes, of course.
And Colin, I also want to point out that when you request a longer URL, because when you first requested that, I really didn't see a real good reason why until I heard your presentation. And now, I understand that the coordinates of the points for a map are passed in the URL. So if you would explain why you want a longer URL, what is the benefit? I think it could have some greater value.
I was certainly, Michael Aldridge was there, but that is certainly one of the main reasons for mapping purposes. I think, to be honest, the length of the URL is officially 2048 characters for the standard web browser control. It's 2083 for the ActiveX version for some reason, but I think there are some very long URLs of Microsoft help sites that are too much for that limit as well. The one way around it, of course, is to use a static image, as I did instead, where you can can get much longer
But just to
URL
say
sets.
for mapping doesn't explain,
No, you're right.
especially people that don't understand that all those coordinates go into the URL. I think you really need to point that out.
There's also, my next web page is going to be basically the same topic as I did at DevCon, with a whole series of different examples and an example app to go with that. So that hopefully will be ready within the next week or so. Moving on from that one, new Monaco SQL editor or something of that sort, maybe Twin Basic by the time it happens there, but one way or the other, improvements to the SQL editor. And the last one, I genuinely don't know what it means. Somebody who does, please would they interject, what exactly does Microsoft Graph Data Connector mean?
That's like a people thing. So they've like renamed graph to mean how people move through these organizations and how people are connected.
Thank you. Is it okay? Right, lovely. As I said, that's if you want to find that article there, go to my website, isleofdogs.co.uk, memory lane, and you will be able to get to that from the home page. All the latest items are shown there. And there are 200 or so pages in my website, so do have a look if you haven't been there before. I'm going to stop recording in a second. I'll stop sharing now, and
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you,
and
Crystal.
Thank you, Alessandro. And Colin, I love your website. You have a lot of tremendously good stuff.
Thanks again, Crystal. See you all next month.